everyone's here except Gita.
Gita, yeah. And I hadn't heard anything from her, so.
Okay. So.
All right.
Moreland,
go
are
ahead
you?
and put us live then?
I think we'll go ahead and go. Is that okay, Carol Moreland?
Yes, I think that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, we're ready, Colton.
Okay, you're live.
I have a script for the KSBN Education Committee to read to you this morning because of our Zoom and YouTube process we're using now. Hello, I am Patsy Zeller and I serve as chair of the Education Committee of the Kansas State Board of Nursing. I ask the members of the Education Committee to respond to a roll call signifying their presence at this remote open meeting via Zoom and YouTube. Excuse me, when I call your name, would you just say present? Carol Bragdon.
Present.
Mandy Carstetter.
Present.
Gita Noble. That person is absent. Christina Rudisil.
Present.
Karen Kidder.
Present.
Dee Blanablest.
Present.
Amy Height.
Present.
I also ask the following board staff members to signify their attendance. Carol Moreland, Executive Administrator.
Present.
Janelle Martin, Nursing Education Compliance Officer.
Present.
Chelsea Stephenson, Education Secretary.
Present.
Public comment allows individuals to address the Education Committee about their concerns. However, the Kansas Open Meeting Act, which is known as KOMA, does not require the Education Committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. As we will not know what comments an individual may make, we would want to provide notice to the public of our intent to discuss a particular matter so that the public may listen and observe our discussion. Public comment will not be taken today due to that concern and because this is a meeting conducted by Zoom and as an alternative YouTube, where the connection may be lost at the time for the meeting may not allow everyone who is present to comment. Because we are conducting this public meeting by Zoom and YouTube, I state for the record the following information. On November 23rd, 2020, the board sent notice of the meeting of the Education Committee to all individuals who have requested notice of the committee's meeting. Additionally, the notice and agenda were posted on the board's website, ksbn.kansas.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice and agenda at that website or by sending an email to Carol Moreland at ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and the board staff will send it to you. The notice contains a link to the Zoom identification number and password and the link for YouTube to allow the public to attend this meeting free of charge. The notice also advises individuals who contact the board's office at 785-296-2967. If an individual experiences a technical issue during the meeting, if an individual experiences technical issues during the meeting, that's the phone number to call. The state of disaster emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic, as declared by Governor Kelly and extended by the State Finance Council, will expire on December 15th, 2020. Because the requirements of KOMA are not suspended, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant of KOMA and CAR 16-20-1 concerning compliance with the KOMA during the emergency declaration. The connections to Zoom and YouTube are the only mediums for interactive communication offered for this meeting. Each member of the committee, board staff, or presenter shall state the person's name and title each time the person speaks or votes, as the case may be. Each participant to the meeting shall ensure microphones, phones, or other electronic devices are on mute when the participant is not speaking. Each motion will be clearly stated before the committee votes, and the chair will announce the result of the final vote. A statement or motion will clearly identify and authorize by delegation each member of the committee or staff who will be permitted to sign any document on behalf of the board. The meeting is being recorded, and then recording will be posted to the board's website. The committee has the following items listed on the agenda. Call to order, review of on-site packet, additions or revisions to agenda, announcements, approval of minutes for the meeting held on September 2020, Nursing Education Compliance Officer Report, site visit reports, new business, unfinished business, petitions, Agenda for the committee meeting in March 2021, adjournment. The meeting is now called to order and the committee will now consider the next item on the agenda. So the next item on the agenda is the review of the on-site packet.
Madam Chair, this is Janelle Martin, the Education Compliance Officer. We do have an on-site packet. It has one major curriculum change request. I apologize, that was my oversight. They did get it to us on time and I did not get that to the agenda. So it's for the graduate program and we would like to put it under new business. Well, we'll get to that, but
Will that be number F? I mean,
has the request.
and for a major curriculum change?
Yes, their documents there are for curriculum change. They would like to increase their program hours. And so the documents there show how they plan to do those hours. And then the main bulk of it is their handbook, which just shows they're not changing objectives. Everything stays the same basically, except for how they're calculating hours so that they can increase program hours without increasing cost.
Okay, so we'll put that as number F under new business and we'll finish that. Is that okay? Or does it need to be under the major curriculum change after lebec?
That'd be good.
Okay, so we'll put it in there right after lebec's bi-level program.
Very good.
That's we'll put it there. Okay, any other additions or revisions to the agenda?
That I have, that's the only one that I know of.
Okay, Chelsea, I think you have all the motions.
Yes.
So we're gonna let you read those. So if I get to one of those and I'm skipping past you, would you just let me know, break in and say we have a motion for whatever event we're doing?
Sure. So I do have two motions then to read right now.
Okay,
The first, is there a member on the committee who would like to make a motion to approve the addition of an education committee on-site packet?
Karen Kidder, I'll move.
This is
Christina
Carol
Bristol,
Bragdon, I'll second.
there's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say yes.
Yes.
All opposed say no. Okay, that motion carries.
Is there a member on the committee who would like to make a motion to approve the addition of a major curriculum change request from the University of St. Mary to the agenda beneath new business?
This is Carol Bragdon, I will so move.
And I will second that, Devon and Blessed.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say yes.
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 Opposed say no. That motion carries. The next thing we have on the agenda is any announcements. Carol, do you have any announcements, Carol Moreland?
No, I don't believe I do right now.
Okay, we'll just keep moving on to the next part of the agenda, which is approval of the minutes for September 15th of 2020. Did everyone have a chance to look at that?
There is a correction that needs to be made.
Okay, and what page is it on? Do you know?
It is on page 2.
And the correction is,
Under the rationale for change says Coffeyville and it should be Johnson County.
did we get that noted for the change in the minutes? Okay, anything else that anyone saw in the minutes that needed to be corrected?
Oh, and I also, sorry,
That's okay.
after my name, the MSNR, it should stop at RN. I'm not sure where the C came from, but
Okay. Anything else in those pages of minutes? Not hearing anything. Chelsea, do you have a motion for us?
Yes. Is there a member on the committee who would like to make a motion to approve the September 2020 Education Committee minutes as drafted with corrections made related to the Johnson County Community College major curriculum change.
This is Karen, and I will make that motion.
This is Amy Hyde. I will second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say yes.
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 Opposed, say no. Any abstentions? That motion carries. Okay, next on the agenda is a Nursing Education Compliance Officer report. Janelle, I think that's your turn.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I would just like to point out the committee report is in your packet, but we do have several updates for nursing programs. This was a busy quarter for changes to the nursing programs. We did have a letter of intent that arrived from Barclay College in Haviland, Kansas to develop a BSN degree program with their institution. So that was new. Butler Community College has a new Associate Dean for Nursing, Caleb Ediger. Flint Hills Technical College has a new program director that started in October, Patricia Parks. She has been faculty there and has been named the program administrator. Manhattan Area Technical College, Lori Stegeman resigned, and Deidre Greeley has been hired as the interim director for the programs there. Newman University, for their RNA program, they have a new assistant director, Sarah Kelly, who will also be faculty there. Osawatomie State Hospital sent an announcement that Janet Batters is the new director for their LMHT program. And Washburn Tech, they've had Jane Carpenter as their interim when their previous director left, and Pamela Masters has been named the new director for health occupations, which includes their PN program. I just also wanted to bring attention to the site visits. All the site visits that were canceled last April due to COVID were rescheduled and completed this fall. We did 2 by on-site and 2 virtually due to some concerns in the communities. And I just want to add that I think the virtual visits went very, very well. We were able to get the information that we needed, and they went really very smoothly with our new guidelines in place and cooperation from administrators. It went very, very well, and we're very appreciative to Colby and Seward for handling that very, very well. One of the things I wanted to, the FQR process, which has moved to online through the website, I've continued to get very positive feedback about that. I haven't heard any major glitches. The one thing that seems to still be coming up are incomplete. And I think that has to do with, I may have mentioned this the last time, higher exceptions are our biggest return. They need to come with either an initial FQR or an updated FQR, and many times they just come with the higher exception. I think an old practice was to send in the old FQR along with the higher exception. And now that we have this process, it just has to be submitted as an updated FQR online. So I think I'm seeing that kind of decreasing as the time rolls on. So hopefully we'll get that all figured out. But we had 128 submitted this quarter, so it was very busy. And I think for the most part, it went very, very well. I think the only other thing I want to point out is that the program administrator orientation that we did virtually in September, since we do have several new administrators, we did put that PowerPoint that was used for that process online, and it is accessible. So it has information there that might be useful for new administrators. And so I just wanted to point out that it is there on the website. The other thing that we put out there in terms of resources for program administrators is a template it's an example template for a program evaluation. We've had several questions, and Carol did a presentation this summer at the educator conference, and there were several requests for some type of template for a program evaluation or some kind of systematic evaluation plan. So we did put out on the website under program administrator resources, there is a template and some guidelines. These are strictly guidelines and a template. This is not a requirement by KSBN that you have to use this template. it is a suggestion for a way to go about looking at how to do a complete evaluation. So I just wanted to point that out and say that it was out there as a resource. Department of Education, I talked about that last time, the U.S. Department of Education and their new regulation about knowing what states your program fits requirements. We're still getting quite a few, even with information on our website about it and what NCSBN has done. I probably had over 40 by the time the quarter ended, but it's getting better and people are getting a little bit better about understanding where to look for it since we do have it on our website. So those are the things I wanted to highlight. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Does the group have any questions for Janelle?
Thank you.
Thanks, Janelle, for that report. The next thing on the agenda is site visit reports. And I asked Carol Moreland and the staff to put a piece on there we titled it Review and Clarity of Education Policies and Procedures. And I just want to introduce this a little bit. I'm going to ask Carol Moreland to kind of give us a little bit of background of how we got here. She can do that much better than I, although I lived through quite a bit of that. She can help summarize that. But as an introduction, in the last couple months, it's become apparent that we needed to work on some clarification regarding reapproval of school visits to include what we call focus visits and conditional approval. This fairness in evaluation and consistency among the schools is the backbone of the evaluation process. I'm just going to stop right there. I have some more things I'd like to introduce with this, but I kind of want Carol to kind of give us a background of how these site visits have kind of evolved over the last few years and why I asked to put this on the agenda for some discussion with the Education Committee.
Okay, thank you. This is Carol Moreland, the Executive Administrator. And, probably back in like 2016, when I was still in the education role, we started to see a few more programs who had some issues with pass rates as far as not meeting our 75% rate. So they were then submitted reports to us saying what they were going to do. So it was really felt like at that point in time, if the year following the report that they submitted, if they were still 75%, that we needed to check with them, we needed to follow up with them to see how it was going. If they were doing what they said they were going to do, if they had found that those actions were not helping, what changes had they made? That's really where this whole follow-up site visit kind of came to be. We put together a form, and the intent was truly to go out there and look at the progress that they made on the report that they had submitted to us, because usually they have actions, what they're going to do, problems that they've identified, first of all, that are leading to this low pass rate, and then actions that they're going to do. So the follow-up visit was really to go out there and see if they were doing what they said they would do, and if it was helping. If not, what kind of changes they were making. And at that point in time, we usually identified, all the actions they said they were going to take, and where were they at with that. That was part of the report. And then the other part of the report was strengths that we saw and opportunities. But at the beginning, we were not making recommendations. It was never meant to be a reapproval site visit or a site visit really to do anything with their approval status. It was truly just a follow-up visit to the report that they had submitted. So is that pretty much, Patsy, what you wanted me to share?
Yeah. Thanks for that, Carol. The questions that come from that, though, are more far-reaching than that, because we're kind of in a situation here where we've struggled with some pass rates with some of the schools, and we are we're finding ourselves in a place without some policies or some guidelines, it's very difficult to handle every excuse me, every program consistently and with fairness. And so some clarification is needed here. As a person that's done quite a few of those site visits, if you've ever helped do those, every school is unique and the circumstances are always different there. And our undergraduate regulations for nursing education were updated several months ago by the Education Committee and approved by the board. With these changes proposed, I think there's an urgency for this clarification with the anticipation that the implementation will happen soon. Those regulations have in them a higher request for a higher pass rate. And so then the focused visit or the conditional approval, another visit or a follow-up report, whatever we're going to title that, would probably be more for our group because of the struggle with the pass rates. So in clarification of the evaluation process, I would like to include some of the following pieces, and I'm just going to go through this. You can tell I've spent some time thinking about this. I had typed this out so I wouldn't mess this up. But there's several questions that we have here. And when we get into it a little deeper, probably more questions. Purpose for the special focused visits. For example, schools with conditional approval status. Definition of the terms. So what is a focused visit or conditional approval or follow-up report? Specific areas to include in the report. Possibly a template for those reports. A proposed timeline regarding follow-up report in the improvement plan. Meaning when we put them on an improvement plan or a follow-up report, when do they come off of that? What is the guidelines that we have about a student not being on conditional approval, or when their pass rates start over or recount, et cetera, et cetera. Focus on regulation and consistency with the use of the circumstances above. Guideline for consistency for fairness and helping schools understand the process better and being able to plan for the expected outcomes. If we have policy and procedures and a template, a guide, an algorithm, whatever we come up with, the schools should be able to look at that and pretty much know exactly where they're at on that spectrum and be able to at least have some planning opportunity as to what the next steps would be without guessing which card is going to be played that day. There needs to be more consistency with that. We are pioneering at different times with the end of 2020, and the Education Committee and the Kansas State Board of Nursing has the opportunity to strengthen this process for future visits as well as current management of the approval processes. In order to move this process along, I'm proposing that we put a task force together to bring back some guidelines that help clarify the processes that I've mentioned. And I went ahead and selected some persons on our Education Committee that have been involved with this process for some time. And because of the COMA laws, I can only take 3 people off of this committee, plus some staff and agency personnel to help us run this task force because we are under the COMA laws for open meetings. So I have previously asked some members if they would be okay with serving on this task force, and that is Carol Bragdon, Dee Bonham Blessed, myself, Carol Moreland, and Janelle Martin. And if the group is in agreement with that, and we'll have some discussion here, we would like to begin to work on this project as soon and bring back several proposals for the March 2021 meeting. One of the things with the task force that I have realized that maybe I could help clean up as the chair of this committee was when we put a task force together that we put in writing a charge or charter or both, so that the committee knows exactly, or the task force knows exactly what they're looking at. Because once we start doing that and working with those pieces that I have just outlined here, then sometimes we find something else that might need to be tweaked too, but maybe it's out of the scope of that task force to really work on that. So I have written a couple things down here as charter in charge of this group, which what I would want the group to work on or what I think they could work on. And then if there's something else we need, we would come back and regroup and do another task force to clean up something else. So the group would meet and bring back the proposals or the suggestions that we would have a draft in the March meeting, and then we would move on from there. So the two things I wrote down was draft proposals for template to be used in focus visits to include specific areas of concern, standardized recommendations, reporting. And also clarification of complete process of the focus visit to include policy and procedure for this clarification. Those are kind of broad, but they include several things that I have run into in the last couple visits that I've been at, and struggling trying to help the schools find a way through this with the pass rates where they're at and where we might be heading when those regulations are approved. We don't really need a motion. We just need a consensus to be able to do this. Is there any discussion here? Does anybody have some more input or had some more experience? Are we on the right, am I on the right track or?
This is Christina Rudison. I think it's a great idea. I think it's absolutely necessary to get that from being on both sides of the fence of being with the school, the pass rates were not a concern, whereas being with school where there definitely were a concern. You know, I can definitely appreciate that additional guidance from the board of this is what we need, this is kind of what we expect, rather than just trying to come up with it. So, I mean, and regulations they can get confusing when you're not well versed. So I think it's a fantastic idea to have a little more guidance on that.
This is Carol Bragdon, board member. I absolutely agree with what Christina has said. We just need some very clear guidance for staff, for board members, as well as for schools. And the regulations and statutes just don't give us that clarity that we really need so that we can fairly apply the standards across the state to equally apply to all schools. I'd like us to work on an algorithm, if you will, that says, you know, if your school fails to meet state board requirements or whichever requirement, that it's very clear what the time frame is and what the consequences. In the past few years, it seems like there just have never been any end to it. We just let it go on and on and on and on and on. And the hard decision has to be that at some point we say no. So in keeping with our mission of protecting the safety of the citizens of the state of Kansas, and if we don't have some clarity on what that truly means, we're not doing our mission. So I absolutely agree, Christina.
Right, and this is Dee Bonenblest, and I will absolutely concur with both of my colleagues in that this is really about certainly public safety, but I think more importantly, I really do believe all schools of nursing are really trying to do their best. And this will provide a clear, I mean, and yes, we have regulations, but this will provide a clearer direction for those programs. So I definitely agree, Carol, that we need a template, an algorithm, something that will give us that, give all the programs a clarity, and then certainly this committee, and then the board as a whole, giving them a direction to go. So certainly agree with both my colleagues.
Any other comments or questions? With the movement of some of the board members and some of the committee members on and off of and serving to help keep the wheels on this bus moving, that's my urgency here, is to get something in place so we can follow through in the next few months and have some consistency there. The last thing I want the education or the board to be viewed at as a person that is not fair and has favorites. That's not the truth at all. If anybody knows me, they know that's how I stand. I'm pretty black and white with that. And I am a director of a school that struggles like everybody else making things work. And so I understand the challenge here, but I think it's timely. So unless I have somebody in opposition, I think that's what we'll go forward with. Anybody have any comment that? And we have volunteered ourselves for a lot of work here in a few months. So, but I do think we can come back with some guidelines, some suggestions that the committee can work on when we come back in March. So I'll be in touch with the members of that group and we'll get things started, probably not before Christmas, but we'll start right after the first of the year and see what we can figure out, what we'll do if that's an agreement. Is that okay? Okay, we're going to move to the next, is the site visit report. Lebec Community College reapproval site visit for the bi-level program, and it was on November 4th and 5th. Janelle?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. This is Janelle Martin, Education Compliance Officer. We did do the Community College bi-level nursing program. We did both levels on November 4th and 5th, and we did do this as an on-site visit. Myself and Karen Kidder were the site visitors for that visit. The strengths for this program that we found is there is just tremendous support for this program from the community, the college, the local hospital. There's a great partnership and connection there. The Lebec County Community College's their nursing program was recognized as #1 in the state by registerednursing.com. That was told to us by the president and several of their other staff. So it's well known even outside of the nursing department on campus how well the program is doing. There's very strong leadership from the program administrator, Dr. Bonenblust. Sherry Simpson, the program assistant, is very organized, supportive of faculty, of the students and visitors. They all also stated too that they find her very helpful. A very cohesive and supportive faculty. The students recognize the strengths of the program and the strong pass rates as reasons for, several of them mentioned that as reasons for coming to that program. Although many of them are in the area and are very happy to have such a strong program that's close to them. Students, hospital staff, and college administration are all very complimentary of the dedicated student-oriented faculty and their wealth of experience. They have a lot of continuity with their faculty. They have a simulation lab with control rooms, mannequins, dedicated faculty for that, for their simulation center. They built something new not too long ago, and they have just really set it up nicely and good educational opportunities for their students. Classrooms have good social distancing, individual computers for each student. They've done a good job of meeting all the standards and so that their students can still manage face-to-face with the faculty, and been very creative in those teaching techniques for the students. Opportunities, one of the things we found, they just have an extensive data collection for their program evaluation. And one of the things we said maybe is to consider clarifying what data they're collecting and what it's going for, and to make those details available in their faculty minutes. So it makes it clear what their data is intended for. And then also to consider clarifying contract language to ensure understanding that contracted facilities. There is a statement that talks about being staffed independently of students, but maybe just to clarify that language and have their legal department maybe okay that. Recommendations for the program is we recommend full approval for the bi-level program with a 5-year approval for the level 1 and a reapproval for the time period of accreditation, national accreditation, which is 8 years for their level 2.
Thanks for that report, Janelle. Any questions? Chelsea, I guess we're ready for a motion.
There we go. Sorry about that. Is there a member on the committee who would like to make a motion to accept the site visit report for Lebec Community College bi-level program, approving the LPN program for a time period of 5 years and reapproving the ADN program for a time period of national accreditation?
This is Carol Bragdon. I will so move.
This is Christina Rudisell, second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, say yes.
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 All opposed, say no. And An abstention.
And I abstain. This is D. Bonenblest.
That motion carries. Okay, we're going to move right on into new business with major curriculum change requests for WSU Tech PN program.
Yes. WSU Tech is asking, their PN program is asking to include IV therapy in the practical nursing program, and they would like to start that January 2021. They've submitted their change request with their syllabus for their Nursing Care of Adults 1 and Nursing Care of Adults 1 clinical to show how those objectives would be placed into those classes. And we do have all those with major curriculum changes are available if we have any questions that we need from them, if you have any questions of them.
Any questions for Janelle or anybody that's requesting this change? Okay, hearing none, Chelsea, I'll let you read our motion.
Is there a member on the committee who would like to make a motion to accept the major curriculum change from WSU Tech PN program to include IV therapy beginning January 2021?
This is Karen, and I will so move.
This is Christina, I'll second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? All in favor say yes.
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 Opposed say no. That motion carries. Thank you for that, Janelle. Next one is major curriculum change request from lebec Community College bi-level program.
Yes, this is Janelle Martin again. lebec Community College bi-level program is asking to incorporate IV therapy curriculum into their NURS 122 Med-Surg nursing course. I actually believe, and Dee can clarify since she's with us, that this is already part of their program, but has not been available for them to be recognized as IV certified. So they're asking they're wanting to incorporate this curriculum and start this in spring 2021 to put it in the program as and follow the regulations as they have been revised, so that they will also, upon completion of that, will submit the required documentation then to KSBN, so that those students who do pass are recognized as IV certified after they take that course within the program. And they've submitted, what objectives they will use, and that they will follow the process as the regulations require.
Any questions?
So, sorry, this is Christina. I need clarification, please. Would this be considered a major curriculum change because it's already in the curriculum? I'm confused. Or is it just a major curriculum change for them to be considered IV certified?
Yes.
I think it has to do, with the regulations. And Dee, you could speak to that, but we have required everyone asking to put IV in their program and to be recognized as IV certified, that it follows all of the objectives that are outlined in the regulations as a major curriculum change.
So Dee, can you correct me if I'm wrong, but this is so that for those students that choose to stop at the PN level, they can be IV certified at that point?
Yes,
Is that
ma'am.
correct?
Yes, this is D.
Okay.
Bonenblest. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, all right. Sorry, it just kind of threw me for a little bit. So like, well, you already, okay. All right, thank you.
Realizing that with the bi-level program, not all the students have to test. If they don't want to, correct? That's an option D, correct?
Right, that is correct. So for a bi-level program, our students are not required to sit for the PN exam. It is an option, as Patsy indicated. So this would give, as Janelle correctly stated, would give our students that opportunity to be certified in IV therapy, along with that option to become an LPN.
Thank you for that clarification. Different than my program where I work is a 1+1, two separate programs, and everyone has to come to the second year of the ADN part with their LPN licensure. So those are all eligible for that IB certification. So thanks for clarification. Any other questions?
And just as a point of reference, we have just recommended to any program applying to or wanting to do IV therapy, because I think there are more than one bi-level, there's more than one bi-level program that may have already had IV therapy in the curriculum, but maybe not exactly in the way that it would allow for certification at the PN level. So we've asked, and the regulations, I've just told them to follow that and to submit the major curriculum change so that that's becomes very apparent and is on record.
So for new members and for people that are not currently in the education process and out of school, this is a big step for the PN group. So we have to get everything kind of straightened out, and every time we turn around, it's another question that we need to answer. So we're working through that process. So thanks for the help. I guess we're ready for a motion. Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, we're in discussion. I'm sorry. I didn't make my marks on my paper. I guess we're ready to vote then after that discussion. All in favor, say yes.
Yes.
I don't think
Yes.
a motion was made.
Oh, motion wasn't made. Sorry. Okay.
No.
That's why I
Is
didn't have
there-
the marks on my paper, right?
Is there a member on the committee who would like to make a motion to accept the major curriculum change request from Lebec Community College ADN bi-level program to incorporate IV therapy curriculum into Nurse 122 Medical Surgical Nursing course?
This is Christine. I'll make that motion.
Karen, I will second.
Motion is second. Now, any other discussion? Hearing none. Everyone in favor, say yes.
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 Opposed, say no. An abstention.
Dee Bonenbless, I abstain.
And I guess the motion carries. Thanks for the help with that, Chelsea. We got through that one. Okay, the next one that we added to the agenda. Janelle, you want to tell us which school that is and what that is?
Yes, this is from the University of St. Mary. This is in your on-site packet, and it's for their graduate program, basically for their master's FNP program, and they also have a post master's FNP program as well. So for both of those, they are asking to increase the clinical practice hours in the program from their current 540 hours to 720 hours. And they would like to implement that starting January of 2021. The requested increase is that they feel like that the 540, which they currently have, just barely meets the minimum requirements. And they feel like that it's insufficient to support students in their transition to the advanced role. One of their concerns was increasing the cost if they increased credit hours. So CCNE, when they were on site last year, gave them some information about how they might do it. So they're increasing their clinical ratio from 1 to 45 hours to 1 to 60 hours, so that they're able to increase their clinical hours from the 540 to the 720 without an increase in cost to the students. So the documents basically support that they're increasing all their clinical courses from 135 hours of clinical time to 180 for each of the 4 courses, and that's how they're doing that. The documentation shows what those courses are and what the new curriculum hours will look like, and the documentation, the handbook will then just, all the objectives and the clinical evaluations will all continue to be the same. They will just, every place where it, before they had 135 hours will now be 180. So with the approval of that, they will change the handbook to reflect the hour changes, but the rest of the information will stay the same.
Any questions for clarification from Janelle? And I guess we're ready for a motion.
Is there a member on the committee who would like to make a motion to accept the major curriculum change request from University of St. Mary MSN FNP and Postmasters FNP programs to increase clinical practice hours from 540 to 720 effective January 2021?
This is Carol Bragdon, and I will so move. And I might just add that I think that that is excellent, and I'm so pleased to see the schools doing that, as we recognize there is so much more for the students to be learning these days. I commend their school and their faculty for that decision.
This is Amy Hyde. I will second.
I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, say yes.
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 Opposed, say no. Any abstentions?
I abstain.
Karen abstains. Okay, and that motion carries. Okay, the next thing we have on the agenda is discussion for practice, academic partnership, clinical partnership programs.
Madam Chair, this is Janelle Martin, Education Compliance Officer. I put that on the agenda. I've had several programs approach me, and most of these are close to borders. There are some practice academic partnerships. This is one of the things that was recommended kind of with the COVID crisis. NCSBN and several larger nursing organizations, I think there were 10 in all. There's a policy brief that they put out on this, the idea of the clinical practice partnership or clinical practice academic partnerships. There are a couple of states that already had that in process before COVID. And with the COVID crisis, they kind of fast tracked it. And so there are some information that was available about that in the policy brief. But what's come available is that Missouri is one of the states that is already working with those and do have a couple of systems that are already working with schools on those partnerships. And Kansas has 3 or 4 programs that work with Missouri school or Missouri facilities for some of their clinical education. Some of these programs are using the partnerships primarily for their capstone, but I think the thing that's come up, the question that's come up is there anything in KSBN regulation that would preclude a nursing program from working with facilities on doing these clinical partnership programs? And one of the pieces of that is that it basically they can all work differently, but the one that I'm looking at primarily right now that's come to my attention 2 or 3 different times from programs is the facility basically would hire the student nurse and they would be working for that facility, but they would also work with the school to complete their objectives. So they would be paid to be working for the facility, but they would also be getting clinical credit for the work that they do in certain courses, especially related to capstone. This is primarily where it's being used right now. And so I think the question was just, is there anything that would, or does KSBN have, the board have any concerns or questions, or is it something they want to get more information on, or some guidance to the programs that are looking at these as alternatives, because these partnerships don't always allow for every student to have that opportunity. It's a voluntary thing, but programs would have to have a way to include all students in the opportunity if they wanted to, and then how are they going to complete objectives so that everybody is meeting the same objectives ultimately in the end. So I guess the main question is there anything that would, regulatory wise, that would preclude them from pursuing those kind of relationships? And would KSBN want to be involved or get more information on what the program is?
Any questions for Janelle with this discussion?
Oh, this is
About the Missouri workforce. So I sat briefly on the board for the Missouri workforce, and one of the things that they talked about extensively was, that students would be able to apply and the workforce committee actually paid for that work. So it was more of a scholarship rather than a job. Is that the same thing, or is that something different?
No, this is actually what came to my attention is a specific clinical partnership program that Freeman Health System in Missouri is doing. And I can tell you they have an 11-week program that delivers hands-on clinical education to nursing entering their final semester of the nursing program, and that they get paid clinical time. And what they're trying to do is kind of minimize that gap transition from student to RN. So there are some stipulations in place when they do this kind of partnerships about whether the student working there, and they would be committed to working there for some time afterwards as well. But they're trying to find a way also in that partnership program to get them academic credit in that final semester. This particular program is for the final semester. But I think in general, I've been asked questions about practice academic partnerships, and is there anything in our regulation that would preclude schools from pursuing those kinds of partnerships? This happens to be a particular one that's already in place with some Missouri schools. So they have some precedent for it. They have some ways that have already been looked at on how they design that. It would still have to fit objectives for the program and follow the Kansas regulation. But I think questions from the program administrators on this are related to whether they can pursue that.
Carol Moreland. I'm sorry, Carol Moreland, do you have a comment?
I do. I just want to, I don't know for sure if I know the answer, but I just want to draw your attention to KAR 60-2-105 that talks about clinical resources. Under number C, it says the faculty of each nursing education program shall be responsible for student learning and evaluation in the clinical area. So I guess my question for that would be, if they're working there as an employee, is the faculty still being responsible for the student learning and evaluation? And then number H on that very same one says each affiliating agency used for clinical instruction shall be staffed independently of student assignments. So I'm not really sure how that fits with that. Maybe it's not considered a student assignment, but Janelle asked the question, is there anything in our regulations? And kind of those are the two that maybe come to my mind. And then under 60-2-107, student policies, it says that each nursing education program shall have clearly defined written policies for the following. And number 6 is student role versus employee role. So I'm not sure if that's still going to be really clear if you go this route. I think this is a great idea, but the question was, is there anything in our regulations? And so I just wanted to bring those two up. I don't know if that's up to you.
And just
all.
a couple of things in response to that, because those were questions that I brought up in I attended an NCSBN. They were looking at kind of the outcomes of some of these clinical practice partnerships in other states and some of the learnings, and they had practice, they had academic, and they had student participation in all of that. And I think the answer to some of that, Carol, is that, and to others, is that they are using it, even though they're being paid as an employee and they're working, they may work a 12-hour shift and they may be paying to do that. There is also embedded in that a preceptored clinical time. So there would be a preceptor. That's kind of where the staff is involved, and or a faculty member. So some of the programs are doing it where they have dual. So they might have a faculty person who is also an employee of the programs that may be on site, or they might have a faculty person who's doing an oversight of a preceptored experience. The difference being that person also, that student also works there in their I guess, and again, it's in the way it's structured. Some of them are using it as a preceptored experience. Others are finding ways to use staff as the faculty because they have dual assignments as both faculty for the school and are employed by the. So there are different ways that they are working with their regulations pertaining to faculty oversight, and they would have to have the objectives and the evaluation. There would have to be some input and some oversight by the faculty that those objectives are being met as well. That's my understanding of how this one works, is more of a preceptored experience.
This is Cal Bragdon. I think I appreciate the need to expand students' experiences, particularly when it comes to capstone, one of my favorite areas when I was faculty. However, I think this raises a number of red flags and can be quite a slippery slope headed for conflict when we come to staffing crunches. And, right now we're anticipating some very significant staffing crunches. And my experience has been, even when I was a staff educator, was if the staffing gets short, it's the education things that go by the way. You can't do in-services or mandatory, compliance types of things, anything else, if you don't have the staff to take care of the patients directly. So what happens as staffings become more difficult and you've got these near graduate level students that are actually employees of the hospital, what's going to happen to their education at that point? And then how do you really supervise? There's an inherent conflict of interest between the faculty role, again, and even sometimes we see that with preceptors. They just, the focus is divided. And I just, not that there isn't some merit to these things, but I think we need to tread very carefully, or we're going to get ourselves into some significant issues down the line that we don't want to be in. We are education. We are not in the business of supplying staffing. We fought that battle many years ago, and I think it's going to rear its head. I think we need to tread very carefully. And if such a thing is considered, we would need extremely detailed and structured guidelines.
This is Mandy. I'm going to agree with Carol. We are in a huge crunch. As you all can tell, I'm exhausted. I'm doing both sides, and I am the staff development director for our facility. I do a lot of education, and with this crunch, it has come by the wayside. I struggle with it, but she's right. In this instance, we're going to have new nurses that are doing things that they may be following somebody. We don't know what those guidelines are. What if that person is not doing it correctly and they're learning something that's incorrect, and then it's coming back on the instructor or on that nurse that's new? I think it's a very, very scary situation if you think about it. They need clinical, they need experience, but they also need the structure of their classrooms and how their clinicals run. And I understand the crunch very much, but I also want to make sure that when I have a new nurse that comes into my facility, she has a good education. And I'm not, she needs on-the-job training, of course, but he or she need to know that they've had a good education and a good base, and they've learned from a very educated instructor as well.
And this is Dee Bonenblest, and I will speak to that as well. And I certainly concur with both the individuals that have spoke. The real concern I have is probably just role confusion for the student. Clearly, you can't serve two. And so we at the college and at all the nursing programs, we have guidelines that must be followed in order to meet those objectives of each of the courses. And that is my concern. And Janelle and I were able to visit about those concerns about, and exactly the same things that Carol, you brought up, Carol Moreland, on the different locations that is already in the handbooks that, you can't blur those roles. And so clearly this is, I think, really a bigger push because of COVID. How do we, quote, get clinical in and serve, both roles? But Carol Bragdon, I absolutely agree that this would likely take some very different approaches for regulations and some of the things that are identified. So anyway, that's what I would say is the big concern is role confusion. And then we know the world is not perfect. And then when something occurs, then does the liability come back to the school on the student liability, or then does it go to the hospital? And so then I think now we're looking at extensive attorney involvement and those sort of things. So I would just put that out for discussion as well.
Can I ask a question? Janelle, this is Karen. Is there any studies that have been done on how this clinical alternative, I guess that's a good way to put it, affects board scores?
Not that I'm aware of. The two states that have been at this the longest have a year of experience. What got, and I don't know if they put it into anything official, what they're reporting, at least, you know, in the work that's been, or as they have shared their experience, they have found some pitfalls and they've learned some things from it. But students feel their scores are better. I mean, there's a little pocket of experience that says those scores are better, but in their transition into their roles, they feel much more confident and much able to approach their NCLEX and approach their work without the extensive orientation that maybe they would have had before. And I will just add that most of the states that have done this, or where they have these in place, it has been involvement from the board, their regulatory board, the facility, and the programs. It wasn't done without input, you know, with the regulations in mind. And so I think maybe it might even just be a broader question of, is this something that as programs see opportunities within their own state? I mean, it could be with because one of the things that they're struggling with, this was put into place for a lot of programs because they were struggling with getting kicked out of clinical. The partnership aspect from the facility, they were able to at least get some of them. So I think you're right. Some of it they got into because of COVID, but some of these were already in process when COVID hit. So there's recognition that more active partnership with practice may help two things. It may help get clinical education to a higher level for the students, and it also may shorten transition periods from student role to active role. So I think you've answered some of the questions that I've been presented with, and I guess just trying to get some feel for how to respond to programs when they ask if these are kinds of things that can be pursued, and whether the board would want to be involved in you know, would you want more information about it? Would you want a group to look at this a little more closely to see? And that's why I brought it, is because I'm getting a lot of questions from administrators about the possibilities.
This is Christina, and I just, when I'm thinking about just the general nuances of a clinical day, just a basic clinical day, and some of the things as a clinical instructor I've dealt with, it's like, so if I'm an instructor and I have a student show up 45 minutes late, do I send them to HR or do I deal with it? When I have, you know, I mean, it's just like, there's so many different things, and I'm like, what about when we have snow days and the school closes? What if there's, I mean, it's just all those things where education is different. And all, on the flip side, I can see the value of it, of, you know, I mean, I can think of 30 of my students today that would greatly benefit from attaining a paycheck while they're going to clinicals. But, you know, I don't know. I don't know how it could work and remain full student opportunity. How that would affect staff, how that would affect nursing, education staff. It's a big question. I think it maybe perhaps we look at it, but and just kind of, I would like more information, I guess, is what I would like to see. But I don't know, with our current regulations being written the way they are, I don't know if we would be able to do that without regulation change.
This is Patsy. I'll jump in here just a minute. A couple things I have is our school, our contract says that if I have a preceptor, they're not on the schedule as staff. Because if I'm paying them, they're helping totally with education. I myself have done quite a few hours at the clinical rotation with students, and I am running 110%, just keeping track of what's going on with that, let alone having a patient assignment on what I'm doing. I've worked both arenas, and so I have, as most of you do, I can speak to it. I realize that I have not been employed by that institution for some years, but some of those things never change. Those high acuity patients now, more than 10 years ago. I mean, we're just talking about a lot of things, and I want the preceptor, if I'm paying them, or in some situations, maybe there's an institution that's helped subsidizing that cost of the preceptor because they want to have a product that they can hire. They're helping pay for that salary in some way. But I totally agree with Carol Bragdon and the rest of the comments, Dee, that are here. This blurs this line so hard, and it's very difficult to get constructive feedback on how the student is performing. And I'm the one who has to sign a paper that says that they have met our standard. And I have a really hard time doing that with all the confusion on the floor with what's going on there. I totally understand the clinical need, the struggle. We all are experiencing in that in different avenues of wherever we're at and being told that we're not open to let students come there. So it's very difficult to find a way out of that dilemma. But I really struggle here because I asked the preceptor and the facilities, we've had lots of conversations that they can't be on your schedule because of the regulations that Carol Moreland read. It's pretty black and white there. So I don't know. Also too, I know in a 12-hour clinical day, if you're working to help them out and get your clinical hours, it may not be intentional focused learning, as Carol Bragdon mentioned. It's difficult to do that when you're the educator on the floor with 10 students or whatever. I don't know how much more information you could give us or we could get that would change those black and white answers.
Right. Well, I don't want to belabor. I do have more information on how to manage some of those situations from the ones that have had experience in how they have structured the clinical objectives for the program into the work days. Preceptors, if they use hospital preceptors, may be paid by, they may have both positions. So the days that they're working with a student that's there, they may be working as a preceptor rather than fact. So there are some responses to some of that. And I can put more of that together just for informational purposes. But I think basically I wanted to, kind of put it out there that these things are coming up. And that as a board, if you have a process or a path you'd like me to follow in terms of when those questions come up of response to that, or, say we're looking into it, or to be part of that conversation, if there are truly partnerships that are already in place, we could look at how they're set up to see if they could meet the regulation. And maybe that's one of the other things that could be done, is just how that's currently set up, how it's meeting, how it may or may not be meeting regulation. I don't know if that would be helpful or not, but I think you've answered, some of the basic questions that I've gotten that I could respond to about what concerns are and what possibilities might be. I think it's going to become more of a question as we hear more information from those that are doing it. We're finding more states that are working on a process for it.
This is Carol again. Just let me reiterate, I'm very concerned about the autonomy of the schools. That is where we're going to slip. We're having trouble now with a number of schools meeting state board pass rates and some quality issues. And I think that would only aggravate some of our issues about quality of education. And that's where our emphasis needs to be. I think, agencies are certainly open to develop some student tech programs independent of the schools that can offer, work to students who have achieved a certain level in their school and provide some of that extended experience or orientation that's specific to their agency. We've all worked with organizations who have done that. And I just think that's a much better approach and full of many fewer pitfalls. I don't think these partnerships have been around long enough that there's any valid studies. And I think we have enough going on just trying to keep our regulations and our quality of education. And I'm done beating the opinion now, but a word of caution here, be careful.
Yeah, I think it's way too soon for us to even I don't know. I mean, if it was like a national movement where we're seeing all across the nation, everybody's doing this and they've been doing it for 5 to 7 years and we've got lots of data, that would be like, okay, you know, but I don't know. I personally, I agree with Carol and everybody else. I don't know how I would do that at my school. I mean, I don't know how I could offer equity in education if some students are getting paid and others are not, or, you know, and how would I staff all those? I don't know how I would do it. But I'm a little overwhelmed right now anyway, so I don't know.
As many are. So, well, thank you for the input, and I think you've all answered the questions, and we'll be able to at least provide some feedback if the question comes up.
Janelle,
did
this
you
is
have some
Amy
comment?
Height. Yes,
Uh-huh.
I did want to share, as a border school with Missouri, Pittsburgh State is being requested if we wanted to trial a similar to this with Freeman Hospital in Joplin, Missouri. And there is some data. Crowder College has been doing it since 2019, and they provided us some data. So we are getting the request, and our concern is if other schools do these partnerships and we're not going to do it with Kansas schools, we may lose our clinical slots. So that is a concern for us. So it is something we would like to at least explore. I validate all the concerns that have been mentioned so far. I mean, it's going to take a lot of steps to get something like this in process, but I think it's something we probably need to look at in more detail. One of the big reasons that we're being pushed to do it is if the students are considered an employee, then they are an essential worker. So we can keep students in clinicals versus doing virtual clinicals. I think it was brought about mainly because of COVID. So I think it's something we need to look at. I know the state of Nevada has been doing it for a while as well. So there aren't a lot of large research studies out there with it, but with good clinical training of our preceptors, making sure they understand the objectives of the courses and good selection of the preceptors, I think it's something we need to at least explore.
Well, I'm kind of at a loss here. Every group, help me what you want to do. Sometimes I'm too black and white for my own good. I have to sign a paper that says that they are competent in the areas, although I do lean on preceptors myself, but in a little different circumstance. So what's the flavor of the group? Do you want to put a group together to look at some of the information that Amy has talked about? Because
I
it
think
sounds like
that's wise. I mean, if that's the way the country's wanting to go, and Amy, I can absolutely understand your points. If the students can get their clinical because they're essential workers, but I think we have to discuss what we would have to have in place to make it work with our regulations.
Thank you. Yes, I agree 100%. We still have to make sure it falls with regulations and it's carefully monitored. If it's something we would want to consider as a pilot program, we could look at doing it, or other schools could look at doing it, especially along the border states who rely on those Missouri hospitals for clinicals.
I'm just curious, what title do they give these students when they hire them? Are they nurse techs? What do they do?
I think a couple of the states still have a description for student nurse. Our graduate, some of them are so close to graduation, they give them a status that's similar to what a graduate nurse would have been in the old days before they allow it maybe 4 to 6 weeks before their actual graduation date. That was one way they did it.
So you also have to remember we're working with two different things here. We're working with a Nurse Practice Act from Kansas and one from Missouri. And even though the State Board of Missouri said it's okay, that's a tough one because that
absolutely
doesn't go over into what, but where you're doing clinicals there, I understand. But Amy, does anybody know what they hire them as? I mean, I'm just curious.
I'm looking at the partnership that Freeman has. They have a very detailed program, and they are still called a student nurse, but they are paid by the institution. So I think that's differentiating them from being a tech or a CNA at the employer site, they are
Mhm.
still recognized as a student nurse.
So that
And-
would sound like it's talking about somebody that is within weeks or a month of graduating, not a freshman that's in foundation.
It sounds pretty
Correct. This
similar
is very
to the-
limited to the senior student in their last semester.
It
Yeah.
sounds similar to the graduate programs that some hospitals have,
Mhm.
where they've either graduated or they're getting ready to graduate and they're learning, they're doing part of their orientation, but they're not doing direct patient care for some of the graduate programs. And other graduate programs, it's like they're not considered the nurse on the floor, but they're working with another nurse by side following that nurse, except these students are doing patient care. So that, I think that goes kind of against regulation too, because you can't do, well, if you're under a preceptor, you could. So I don't know.
It almost sounds like some of the nurse internship programs, which is
Mhm.
postgraduate and takes them out of the regulation piece.
Mhm.
Okay, group, we've talked
That
about
would be
this.
much better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's maybe, I don't tell, you guys tell me what you want to do. You want to put a small group together to see what you can bring back with information? Tell me what the group wants to do here.
I'm intrigued, but I'm kind of naturally curious. So I just like to learn about new things that are happening. So I'd be willing to take a look at it, but that's me.
Amy, sounds like you would be interested in that. You have a personal interest there. Does a group want to put a task force together to bring back some information to the committee so we can have another discussion about this? Yes, I see some heads nodding. So Christina and Amy, Janelle,
Yeah, I'm glad to do that. I think we have some resources we can call on to talk that I could contact about those that are already doing it, to ask more specific questions related to how it might impact regulation wise, because we do know that regulations can be different in different states. And right now, Washington, Idaho, Nevada, Missouri, but I think Washington State was one of the first, and Nevada have been very close, and Idaho's one that's done has done a lot of presenting on this topic with NCSBN to showcase that. So there are some places to go to get some questions answered about how they specifically put it in place and what kinds of policy they had to put around it. And
anybody else that'd like to be on the team? Geet, I see you're there. Are you interested in helping with that? You're muted.
I'd be happy to help, Carol. All right.
Thank
Okay.
you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so that would be a, public member. She might look at it in a little different eyes. I just caution you to remember about those nurse practice act and those regulations. We can maybe mirror somebody that's already doing it or piloting it, but we may be dealing with a different set of rules. So we got to put that up front too.
Right.
So as I explained earlier in the meeting, I really feel like the task force needs to have a charter here as to what they're really going to look at. Just bring back details and information about this process. Is that what the group is going to do, to report back in the March meeting? Is that what we're going to do here? Yes.
It sounds like that more specific information about how the program is defined, what the student, how it's defined, is there a preceptor, how they're defined, so that it meets the regulations and objectives for both practice and academic. Does that?
I think just gathering data is what we're really here. No recommendation. I think just data for this point as to where we're at, so we can start the wheels turning and probably be working on this for a while. It's not a question.
Janelle said that Janelle said that the boards were involved in it as well. Did you say that? Could
Yes.
you make sure that that information is included in that as well? What they are involved in and how they're involved, please? Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make
No,
sure that,
that's
because that's really important to me.
Okay, so it looks like we've got another task force going for Amy, Gita, Janelle, and Christina.
Thank you.
So who's going to be in charge of that group? Amy, you want to do that? You want to set up some meeting times and do that? And Janelle can help you with anything that you need for Zoom or
Yes.
whatever.
Yes, I'll be happy to,
Okay.
Patsy.
So we're going to put that on the agenda for March 21, and we'll have some report with some data, information pieces, comparisons, whatever you want to put on that. Not really for a recommendation to how the committee would move, but some information bring back. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we've been at this an hour and a half. Would you like to have a little bit of a break? 10 minutes and we'll come back and finish because we've got a couple other discussion things. I don't think I can rush everybody through that. So let's take a break for 10 minutes. So that would be, well, let's do 10 after 10. Okay, Colton, are we back on ready to go?
You should be good to go.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next thing on the agenda is follow-up from the task force annual report format. We had a task force that was put together with the question of whether we would consider adopting the format from National Council or staying with the format that we had. Is that correct, Janelle?
Yes. We Karen Kidder, Chris, Christina, I'm sorry, and Adrian from our office as well. We've met a couple times, and the questions were twofold. One was to look at what we currently had, look at what the regulations and guidelines are for our current annual report to see if a new template would be to work better. But we also did take a look at the current regulations to make sure that we could meet all of those and that all of those were still being attended to. And I would be glad to let Karen or Christina, if you have anything you want to add, or if anybody has a question about what we did, and I think one of them will submit the recommendation from the task force, or I can if you'd like me to, but certainly really appreciated their input and work on the task force.
This is Christina, and Janelle made it very easy for us. I'll say she gave us a crosswalk between what we're currently using and the regulations in NCSBN. After assessing the NCSBN's annual report format, and Janelle went back with several questions, or Janelle and Adrian went back with several questions for NCSBN that we had, of making sure that, utilizing NCSBN would still allow us to remain compliant with our own regulations. And it looks like it will. We can still have our June 30th date. We can still add any questions that are specific to our regulations. But what I personally really liked about it is I think it helps alleviate some of the stress and work for the Board of Nursing staff, because NCSBN can actually create a lot of that data, and it puts our data in a national pool of data, so we can definitely compare where we're at nationally much easier. So I personally am really excited about the opportunity to do this.
Adrian, do you have any input there?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would agree with that assessment. I thought that the information that was provided from the task force and from NCSBN was sufficient. From an operational perspective, it's good to get knowledge of the direction a little earlier so that we're not trying to do it all last minute. I think the NCSBN solution will provide us with some infographics and research in ways that we currently don't have a real good way to do that. But we still will have access to all of our data and the raw information that we want. And they've assured us that they're able to update the systems as needed, and we don't need quite as much time frame ahead of time to get that done.
I think that they described it beautifully, the fact that we can make changes to it if we need to, and do that within a 30 to 60 time frame, as opposed to the 6 months at least that we have to deal with now. It just seems like a user-friendly option to get the data that we need, that, as Christina said, that can be also paired with the data nationally.
Yeah, thanks for that input. So officially, your recommendation is?
I think the recommendation, as I heard it from the group, was to move forward with the NCSBN annual report format with the ability to add needed questions to cover our regulations, and to do that for the June 2021, and starting with the June 2021 annual report deadline.
Carol Moreland, do we need a motion for this?
Madam Chair, this is Dee
Yes.
Bonnebless. Could I just ask a question? And so I appreciate all the work. Thank you for doing that. The question that I would have is, will the annual report, whether we're using, I mean, if we go to the NCSBN, will we still be collecting the same amount of, or the same type of data as we currently are? So maybe that's a question for the task force, or maybe Adrian. The question I really have is, on the NCSBN, you all probably have reviewed that and note that one of the areas that they want us to evaluate is, do we have an accredited simulation center? And maybe there are those across the state. I don't know. I'm not familiar with that accreditation process. So that's clearly my question is, will we be using our current data that you're already collecting and just using their format? Or will we be going directly toward their NCSBN, their questions? So that's what I would pose to the task force. Thank you.
And I would be glad to respond, and Adrian, any of you can chime in, but the annual report core data was actually based on the guidelines, which I did include in your packet, which is kind of the next. It does have the annual report core data format and what those questions are, as Dee just said. And I think the answer to your question is maybe twofold. One is those core data pieces that they're collecting do kind of speak to those approval guidelines, what they found to be major quality things and also warning signs. They're gathering information on those things, and we'll be able to then put our data into the pool of data from other schools to see if how those things do add up. We will still be collecting data based on our regulations. So it's not that we're requiring simulation accreditation. What they're saying is, in their work, in the studies that were done, they found that to be a factor. So they're collecting data on that to see how, because that was from the study, going forward, how that impacts. And what I've said to other schools that have looked at that, accreditation can be a very expensive process for simulation. And I think one of the things I recommended was just looking at what those guidelines are. I think a lot of schools that are doing simulation don't know that there are guidelines, and that those can be helpful in setting up how simulation labs are run. So no, we are not necessarily moving toward that as a, we're using their guidelines. We would be answering those questions, but we are still gathering data based on our regulations.
So just because we collect the data, Janelle, it doesn't mean it's becoming a requirement, I believe is what you're trying to say.
Right.
And there will be some questions. I know they had some initial questions they were asking about the COVID situation. They had some questions they were wanting to do. There's also a few other benefits to this system. It's going to allow us to do some attachments and uploads. So if there is ever something that comes up last minute, we could adjust it pretty quickly and just have the programs do it as an attachment, including like the school catalog. Right now they have to send it in like either via thumb drive or something like that, or this will just allow us to keep it all together on the system. And the state of Missouri is moving to this solution too. So
I think they have about 6 programs right now that they've currently done. So next July, I think, will be the first aggregate report for all the programs that they've been working with this past year. And we hope to be included in that if this recommendation goes forward. We had actually put it out there. I had actually had Chelsea added as a potential motion. I had understood that we would need approval from the board to move to a new template or to a new format for our annual report. It would still cover the same regulations that we currently have in place.
Carol Bragdon, did you have a comment?
I was going to say, I really appreciate you including that report, Janelle, on our packets. I thought it was quite interesting. There were several things that they're gathering data on that I hadn't particularly thought about, but may really be informational for us. And I think being part of the larger data collection across the country will only benefit us. such things as, just simple things like even frequency of change of program directors. I mean, intuitively, we all know that that can be an issue, but when you start looking at numbers, we might have some fascinating correlations show up that we hadn't thought about looking at. So I'm very much in favor of us being part of the national data, and we may truly benefit from some things we hadn't thought of.
I have every intent of utilizing that data if it comes out the way we all think it will, of trying to propose a, now I can't think of the right word, but, to have somebody stepping in for us, because it's just, I think it's crazy that so many of us don't have that, when we know it's a benefit to, when we retire or resign or what have you, that there's somebody there that already knows the process, that's been working side by side with you. It's just,
and I think it will help the schools, just like you're saying, Christina, if there is data that the directors can then use to go back to their boards and say, hey, I've got some support for why I need to make this decision.
Exactly.
And I would just add, commending the board for the work they've already done on some of the regulations and some of the changes that are in process right now with the ed regs that do speak to some of the things I think that National Board found on their studies, and that the Kansas board has already paid some attention to. And I think that will be to our advantage too for Kansas programs. Again, I think those clarifications of what are we looking for, that makes those templates that we're using and the regulations that we have make a lot more sense, I think, in the long run.
So in summary, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that all the information that we have and are required to have can be put in this report. Plus there may be some extra things that National Council may have on there that would only help us with the database that may do improvement. Is that what I hear?
Right. There is the core data set that they would want everyone to fill out, which most of it is very easy. Yes, no, fill in the blank. Not maybe as time consuming as some of the things that we will have to add, because they are part of our regulation for the more detailed pieces.
Okay, so Chelsea, do we have a motion then? Is that what we're going to do with this for tomorrow?
I do have a motion, yes.
Okay.
Is there a member on the committee who would like to make a motion to approve the recommendation from the annual report task force of the Education Committee that KSBN use the NCSBN annual report template for nursing programs beginning with the June 2021 deadline?
This is Karen, and I'll make that motion.
This is Amy. I'll second.
So motion is second. Any other discussion? All in favor say yes.
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 Opposed say no. Motion carries. Okay, we'll take this motion to the board tomorrow and see what they have to say. Karen Warland, would you just give, I know we're going to talk about this tomorrow, but would you give us a brief update on where the education regulations for the undergrad, where we are in that process?
Sure. I'll be glad to. Right now, they've been through the process several times and get held up with changes, requested changes numerous times. So as you've heard, once we make a change, they have to start all over again. It's a very long process. It's got sidetracked a little bit because of COVID and everything going on within agencies with that. However, where we're at right now is I'm working with Department of Administration. They've all been through Division of Budget. We're down to, I think, one area with the Department of Administration. It was a change that you all wanted, and I think it's just more the wording and getting the language in a way that satisfies them. So I think we're very close to getting everything through the Department of Administration, and then they will go to the Attorney General's office. They've been to the Attorney General's office before. They requested changes, of which we made those changes. So I'm hoping when they get to Attorney General's office again, there won't be a lot of requested changes, but if there are, then it starts all over again. So I think we're closer. but I can't promise you when they're going to be. You know, once they get through the Attorney General's office, then there's a public hearing scheduled. There's a 60-day waiting period. That public hearing is published in the Kansas Register. During that 60-day period, I want everybody to hear this. During that 60-day period, you can make any public comments that you want to our agency in writing. And then you can also make public comments at the public hearing that we give. It's usually held by conference call. And anyone is welcome to listen in on it, give comments or anything. If you give verbal comments, they do have to be followed up in a written format, because all of the comments that we receive then will go back to the board at the next board meeting so that they can review all of the comments. They can decide whether they want to make further changes or if they want to adopt them. So I just want everybody to know that there are opportunities for everyone to give public comments, whether you're in favor or not in favor, because I know there's some controversial changes. And I just want everyone to know that there is an opportunity for everyone to give their feedback. I think that's very important for everyone to hear. So I'm hoping that we're getting closer, but that's kind of where they're at.
Okay, thanks for the update. So that process has several steps yet to go. And just remember that we did some work on these education regulations for all of the levels of nursing education. And we decided not to put them through all in one big lump because we were trying to mirror them through each area of educational, each level. And so we took it back and just started with the undergraduate piece, and that's what we're working on right now. And then after that, the rest of them will be presented and go through the same process. So I just wanted to make sure we all had the same information about where those were in that long process of getting reviewed. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to move on to NCSBN Nursing Education Approval Guidelines.
Madam Chair, this is Janelle Martin, Education Compliance Officer. I mainly put those there. I've kind of had it on the agenda to look at. It was twofold purpose. One was to help provide, you know, what we were already looking at for the annual report template. The guidelines are put out there. They were done after the series of studies that NCSBN did. And in those studies, they not only looked at, they did some. The reason for the study was that many states, many programs were looking for some evidence-based information about how what their guidelines said about approval of nursing programs. So this was a way for them to look at and support and provide support for boards of nursing or regulatory bodies like we are for the requirements we have for our program approvals. So it was done with kind of that in mind. And in the process, they did collection of a lot of data across the nation, not only for annual reports, which was kind of the secondary thing that came out of that was that annual report template, but also of site visit reports. So they looked at thousands of site visit reports from all, and Kansas was included in that study. We did submit data for both annual report and program approval processes and on-site format reports. I couldn't think of the word, sorry. So it's there as a vehicle to kind of look at what those studies found out. What are indications of quality programs? What are they finding to be things that might be warning signs before NCLEX rates start to decline? And I think that was part of the issue, or part of the question that was out there is there some way we can look at programs without solely relying on pass rates? We know we need the pass rates for nurses to, to get new nurses out there, but that there also might be some other indicators that could be looked at. And I think that's where I will go back to what I said earlier about some of the work that this board has already done on the site visit reports that we have. Many of the things that are indicated in this study, we already look at and are part of our reports, and maybe something for the future as we look at the data that the annual report provides. If there's anything more we need to, I think it will help provide us more information about that for our future when we look at regulatory changes or changes in our reporting and how we want to do that if it truly mirrors what we're seeing nationwide. So I just wanted to put those guidelines out there for you to know. It's interesting, in the Appendix A, there is a template for an on-site visit. We already have our templates. I think they do a pretty good job of speaking to these already. And then also, if you're interested in what the annual report core data is going to look like, that's in Appendix B. So it's primarily informational. And if there are any questions about that, or if anybody, it's on the NCSBA website as well. There's a lot of information. There's actually a presentation that's been done that's available on the website for anyone who's interested in them talking more about the studies that went into this and how they came to these guidelines. So I just thought they were very worthwhile to put out there for programs. I think they provide a lot of good guidance and information, that evidence-based information that we all are looking for. So that was all I had. Unless there are questions or anything else, then that was my intent for that agenda item.
Okay, thank you, Janelle. Any other questions we have with that? Okay, I'm going to move to unfinished business. And the first thing on that is discussion clarification for clinical hours, direct versus virtual.
Give me a second, Madam Chair.
Did that have anything to do with COVID?
I think there have been, I'm trying to, I apologize. I thought I looked at everything.
Tell you what, we'll just go past that for now. And if you think of it, let us know.
Yeah, I will look back up. Thank you.
Yeah, so we won't be making up conversation we don't need to have. So virtual site visits, update on a pilot for revised guidelines.
So I kind of did that a little bit. This is Janelle Martin with Nursing Education Compliance. A little bit earlier, we talked about, we did actually do 2 virtual visits this fall. Both of those, interestingly enough, were not reapproval visits. So we still have some things that we haven't addressed, but we were able to accomplish both of those focus visits very, very well with the virtual format. We were able to get all the documents that we needed. We were able to talk with all the groups that we needed to, and found that we might still have some questions in the future for reapproval visits. There are still a couple of things that we have not ironed out in terms of faculty files and student files, but we did do some student files with the virtual visit, and we were able to do them with anonymous. It was really very well done. I will commend Seward County and Colby for both, for how they handled the on-site visit. I think one of the things we did find is, because of the way the wording went with the guidelines, we tried to allow some flexibility. Many of them wanted to do on-site. So a couple of times the decision wasn't made until a week or 2 before the deadline. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on the program administrator, although they were all very gracious in how it was handled. And we were in constant communication with them about that. But I think that may be something we want to address in terms of, if a decision is going to be made, to put a parameter around it so that we're making decisions maybe a little sooner. At least 2 weeks, I think, was one of the recommendations made, and maybe even before that if, but I think of all the things that we encountered, that was the main struggle or concern that was expressed. Everything else went very, very well in terms of the guidelines.
So the update is that you're using it, but we might have some more work to do with.
We might want to put a little more policy or firmness around some of those decision dates. Yes.
Okay, so any questions with that topic in mind? We're going to go to site visits next. So any questions? So the next thing on the agenda is spring 2020
Patsy,
site visit. I'm sorry.
Patsy, this is Carol Bragdon. Can we just clarify, are we still under that guideline that we'll make a decision per individual visit, or have we decided to just be virtual for the next few months?
The next thing under unfinished business is that question. You're right. Spring 2021 site visit, virtual and in person. So I think you're right on the mark, Carol. I think what we're looking at here is some of the frustration here with people that are going to be doing the visit or the school that is preparing for that visit. 2 weeks is a pretty tight turnaround and pretty hard to completely change the way you're doing things, scanning everything for the virtual visit, et cetera, et cetera. So there's been some discussion among the visitors and some of those schools that maybe we would, if the education committee wanted to make a recommendation, that we would just say all the site visits for spring 21 are going to be virtual and not wait for the last 2 weeks before, so they could start preparing now if that's the case of their visit. So that's why that's on the unfinished business, to have some conversation about that. How do you feel about that? Carol just brought that up again. Do we want to make that blanket statement for spring and then reevaluate this summer and see what we're going to do for fall? Or do we want to leave it and move the markup to a month ahead of time? Our COVID numbers and our trouble changes daily like everybody else's. Hospital capacity changes pretty quickly to a crisis and then not. So what's the food of thought here? How do you feel about that?
Madam Chair, this is Dee Bonenbless, and I would just have a question for the individuals who did the site visits as to the specifics. If you were going to change something, if you could do something different, what would that be? And then just your overall, because many of these programs are up for, I believe, reapproval. And if I understood correctly, the two that you did were not reapproval programs, or maybe if somebody would address that, that would be helpful.
And Madam Chair, I'd be glad to start with that. This is Janelle Martin, Education Compliance Officer. The two visits we ended up doing virtually were due to concerns of COVID in the community. So that was why we did move those two virtual. Both programs were kind of aware we might, but also too, the visits were focused more on what was talked about earlier in terms of a focus visit. There are many things about the focus visit that we do the same. We still do the interviews with most of the same groups of people, maybe a little bit different, but for the most part, we're talking to most of those groups. But the documentation may be a little bit different in focusing on what an improvement plan is. We still have a lot of documentation about what the program is doing, but not necessarily all the exact specific reapproval documents that we would need for the reapproval visit. So that, I hope, answers that question. In terms of the two that we did on site, both of those were reapproval visits. So it happened to work out that way. We made a lot of decisions, or looked at a lot of factors before we decided to do on site. And in both the cases, well, I have to say, in one case, the decision was made. I guess they were both made at least 2 weeks ahead of time that we would go ahead with the on-site. The only thing about that, as Patsy alluded to, is that in that 2-week period, a lot can happen to COVID numbers. So I'm not sure. That's why making the decision to do an on-site 2 weeks ahead of time, and if something happens that's really drastic with those numbers, it would be really hard to go to virtual at that point. But and so I think that's why the question has come up. We also know that accreditors are still continuing to do virtual visits through the spring based on COVID numbers too. So I think the question too is, when I talk to the program administrators I've talked to, many of them would have preferred an in-person visit, but understood the reason for virtual, but would have liked to have known a lot sooner. So I think there is some justification for either deciding if it's in question, to designate that at least a month ahead of time, and always in error to choose the one that's the safest, I think is what we're determining, or in this case, whether you want to make a decision to just, if we go to, I guess the thing would be, if we went to an all virtual spring, we could start working out some of the issues that, I think there's really only a couple places we felt there might be issues with documentation, and we could start figuring at that a little bit better, if we had that as kind of foresight, and maybe be able to help the programs in how that we can get that accomplished. I don't know if, I hope that answered your question, Dee.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would actually this is Dee Bonavlis, have another question as to, with those programs that were virtual, did you also do a follow-up face-to-face, or is that part of the plan? Or was it just 100% virtual?
At this point, they were 100% virtual. In one of the cases, there will be a follow-up because they're due for a national accreditation visit. And so the plan is to do a follow-up at the time of the national accreditation visit as well. I think the guidelines had recommended that it could be in the recommendations that the board could make if they felt face-to-face follow-up was needed. I think there were some cases where they felt like the guidelines kind of left it open to the decision of the board based on recommendations in the site visit report, whether a follow-up face-to-face would be needed or not.
So with that discussion, do we want to step out there and make a decision for spring of 2021 and how those will be handled? Or does the group feel like they want to still leave it and maybe we make that decision a month ahead of the time? That means before we break for Christmas, it has to be decided pretty much what's going to be done with Johnson County. So what's the flavor of the group here? I have my own opinions, but I'd like to hear from the group.
So since I'll be directly affected, I'd be happy to share. Honestly, the only concern I have is how we're going to show our site visitors, how we'll showcase our clinical sites and our simulation and those kinds of things that are very difficult to demonstrate virtually. However, as far as documentation meetings, we are prepared for 100% virtual or 100% face-to-face. So, we're fine either way. We would just love to be able to figure out a way to be able to, because we're really proud of what we do and we'd like to be able to demonstrate some of those abilities. So that's really our only concern is just how do we showcase those? Because typically site visitors, as we all know, will go to the clinical site, will go to, the simulation center or what have you. But everything else other than that, I would foresee virtual.
So, Madam President, this is Dee. And so from a program who is going to be virtually accredited this spring, what ACEN is offering is taking an iPad and literally taking that moment in the simulation center, and certainly not in the clinical setting, but you could, so that's what our plan is. And so that's something that could, if that's your concern, that you would be able to alleviate that. So unless somebody else has ideas, we're still preparing for ours. So would certainly take any other ideas, but that's what they are offering us.
That's a good idea. So yeah, we can certainly do that. And we do have recording capabilities and the ability to share those recordings as well. So, I mean, that's always an option too. But I think Janelle froze up.
Any other comments? I think all of us as program administrators are pretty good at our job at selling our product, and we would love to have you face-to-face because we can make our point if needed. And we're pretty good at that. I'm very comfortable with that. But I also understand to stop one of the plates spinning and have a decision in front of you actually makes the job a little bit easier, even though it's a lot of work to do virtual. I know what direction I'm headed, and I can start putting those things in place now. So if I'm not on the list for spring, I am for fall, and I don't really want a virtual visit, but it might clarify some things if somebody decided for me that that's how it was going to be. So if we're not comfortable with making that decision, just blanket. And yes, there is a difference with the reapprovals. You've already been there several years ago, I understand, but we've already put eyes on and had that. If there was some question, I think in the guidelines we had that we would, if there was some question with something clinical site or whatever, that we would make a follow-up face-to-face visit, maybe with a assigned person or a designated person to go check that out before the report was completed. That was some conversation there too. I don't know. How does the group want to proceed with this?
This is Carol Bragdon. I'll take a stab at a couple of observations here. It is, if we can believe the trending data, which I think we need to, things are not going to be better from an infectious standpoint for the next, certainly the first quarter of the year. So number one is we need to keep our visitors and our schools safe as possible. So the less travel among communities, probably the better off everyone is. So it makes sense for at least the first 6 months of the year to have virtual visits, in my mind, just from an epidemiological standpoint. And then perhaps revisit in June how we proceed with the second semester's fall visits. I just do not want to put any of our staff or visitors at risk. And I just cannot, in my mind, justify sending people out to some, the numbers are much higher for infections than they were when we did these prior visits. So that is really my observation. And the second comment about that Patsy just made, that perhaps if we have a understanding that if there's something that cannot be clarified, that we may have to delay action until we are able to fully satisfy things. Not ideal, but we all got to do the best we can under these circumstances and not shortchange the school or shortchange our regulation responsibilities. So that's my comments. Thanks.
I personally would feel completely comfortable. And I think it would benefit, like Patsy's, all of us that, have site visits coming up in the spring to know one way or another now. It's like, for the spring, we're going to follow national accreditation and, what they're doing, and they're doing virtual. So, for safety, we'll do virtual. And I mean, that's, if I had known that 6 months ago, I think it would have changed the entire way that I had started my self-study and everything, rather than flipping in October and starting to plan virtually, which I did that just because of JCCC guidelines. I mean, we've been working from home now since after Thanksgiving, and there's a good possibility that we may not be back till February. So, just planning on that of being virtual. But I think for the sanity of all the other schools, it would be nice if we could just let them know now.
So Carol Moreland, do we need a motion if we're going to do this, or is it just a consensus?
This is Carol Moreland. I would say a motion would be nice if you want to change the format to virtual for the first half of 2021, or however you want to do it.
And because I'm looking at the list here and see that mine is scheduled for the 7th and 8th of September, we aren't going to have another board meeting before then. So I would probably be included in that spring group, or unless we made,
We will.
because we won't have another board meeting to make another decision.
This is Carol Bragdon. I would move that we project all site visits to be virtual and then reconsider that decision at each board meeting to project for the next 6 months. But the understanding would be we would be virtual and not pull back until things look better. And I don't think we can predict when that is. So to be fair to the schools, I would say we ought to just remain virtual and then just review it with each of our quarterly board meetings.
Before I second, Carol, would that include the option of saying that yes, it's a virtual visit, but based on that, we've seen things that make us think we want to do a follow-up site visit?
I would entertain a friendly motion, Karen. Yes.
Well, I don't know the rules. We probably have to vote on yours before we amend it.
I think we can consider a friendly amendment with the option of adding a clarification pending full decision.
Chelsea, did you have a motion listed there for this?
I did have a motion. It just was to approve the recommendation to conduct the spring 2021 site visits as virtual visits. But and I'm not 100% sure, but I think we can, since no motion has been made and voted on, we can amend it to say, you know, indefinitely to be reevaluated at each meeting, or however you'd like me to word that.
So do we want to work? Let's work on the verbiage for sure, so we know exactly what that motion says.
So I was typing as Carol Bragdon was speaking, and what I have is I move to approve the recommendation to conduct all site visits as virtual visits in 2021 to be reevaluated at each committee and board meeting.
And can we add with the option of scheduling a face-to-face visit if deemed necessary before final approval?
So the motion would read, I move to approve the recommendation to conduct all site visits as virtual visits in 2021 to be reevaluated at each committee and board meeting, giving the nursing programs the ability to request an in-person visit. Is that how you're wanting it worded?
It
My
needs to
thought
be
was
the
that
board.
the visitors
Giving the
saw
board.
something that needed to be clarified, that they would request the on-site visit, follow-up on-site visit.
That the team, I understand that the team, if we felt like we needed to go back and do a face-to-face, we could add that to that if there was a need for other information. Not that the school would have a choice.
Allowing the education committee and board to request an in-person visit as needed.
For follow-up, is that right?
Yes. Follow-up in-person visit if needed.
And this is Dee Bonnebless. I would add prior to a decision being made.
Hey, Chelsea, when you get done typing, you can read that one more time and we'll
Okay.
tell you we got to start over or whatever.
Sure. Okay, so I move to approve the recommendation to conduct all site visits as virtual visits in 2021 to be reevaluated at each committee and board meeting, and allowing the education committee and board to request an in-person follow-up visit as needed prior to a decision being made.
Beautiful.
I would make that motion, Chelsea. This is Karen.
This is Amy. I'll second.
So motion and second, any discussion?
I have a concern, question, something. Is it our responsibility to make this motion, or can we give Carol any directive to make those decisions instead of timing it out for the entire spring semester, since we won't meet again for quite some time? How does that work?
Well, that's, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm mistaken, but that's how we kind of had it before, but the decision was being delayed and made quite close to the visit, causing difficulty for some schools to get that all in preparation and change in midstream. So with this motion, I understand it would be all the visits until we met again. That would be in September, would be virtual visits. We don't have any in the summer. May, somewhere in May is the last visit, except my visit at Garden City. That's the 1st of September, and it would probably be included in this because, and I realize that's a long time out, but the discussion is, the way I understand the motion, there would not be an option to reevaluate, it would just be blanketed, correct?
The board will be meeting every 3 months and we'll have to project out far enough. Like for the September visit, if we meet in March and a decision could be made that for the fall or the next 6 months, for those that aren't in that window, because they do have to have reports and things in, 4 to 6 weeks ahead of time. So there has to be some kind of, I think, that parameter needs to be set a little bit better for the program administrators to be able to do what they need to do without all the stress of having to do changes at the last minute.
So we would reevaluate this the March meeting for the rest of the semester or for then on. So this would only really go through the, well, it would be the March 2nd and 3rd with Wichita State University Tech Program for P, and that would be those visits. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those listed. Those would, if we pass this motion, those would be virtual as of today. And then when we met again at the end of March, we would make another decision about the one that's scheduled for May and mine in September or the fall, whatever.
Okay, I feel good about that. Thank you.
Okay. So we don't say 6 months, we just say to the next board meeting, education meeting. Okay. Any other discussion? I have a motion, a second. All in favor say yes.
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 All
Yes.
opposed say no. The motion carries. So this will be taken to the board tomorrow, and if they have any other concerns, they will mandate this is taken as a motion and a proposal to them, and then they will vote on that and decide if they're okay with that. So thanks for the help with that. And then we go right into the site visit schedule, which we were already just talking about for 2021 nursing and MHT program site visits. Anything you want to update there, Janelle?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I apologize for my disconnection. I'm not sure what happened, but in terms of the site visit, I still do have, I have some question marks by some of the site visits. I may need to do some changing in terms of who is on there. If you have any concerns about one where you're listed, please let me know. Or if you would like to be included on a visit and you're not listed, I would be open to that as well. We had some changes, I think, in board membership since I made the schedule. And there's still a couple of question marks on Pratt had to be rescheduled. They were scheduled this fall, and due to COVID things and everything else going on, the board executive committee asked us to schedule them for spring. So I'm still working with them on a date. But I think everything else I don't have anything to add to it. No, I think everything.
Okay, well, if you have a need or want to see if you can help with some of that, contact Janelle and get on the schedule. New members, if you're wanting to go and observe, there's an opportunity, or be on the Zoom and observe kind of what goes on. That's a possibility too. Some of us started like that. We weren't really part of the exam team. We helped, but we learned the nuts and bolts of how that takes place. So that's an option too that we could let Janelle know and find out. Okay, any other discussion there, or are we ready to move on?
I'm good.
Okay, the next thing is petition for permission to retest from 15 to 11/6. Anything about those permission to read?
This is Janelle Martin, Education Compliance Officer. I believe everybody's there, and there are no changes to that. We have, what do we have? 7 petitioners for this time. We do have 2 repeat petitioners on that list. I believe. Yeah, 3, actually. But
Re-
conditions are all set.
Repeat meaning they have been through this petition.
They've been through the petition process before, taken their exam. Well, one of them took the exam and failed. I do have one of them that applied, got permission, and didn't quite complete her due to a lot of things she was not able to complete. So she had to resubmit her petition. She has not tested. That was Euphorioma. But
Okay.
the other
So,
one did test.
okay, so Chelsea, do you have a motion for us?
I do. Is there a committee member who would like to move to approve the petition for permission to test summary from August 15th, 2020 through November 7th, 2020, which includes Chandra Daniels, Maria Freeman, Erica Hunt, Jamie Lane, Eufioma Orugahor, Renu Shrestha, Gabriela Torres.
I'll make that motion. This is Karen.
I'll second. This is Christina.
A motion is second. Any discussion? All in favor say yes.
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 All opposed say no. That motion carries. Okay, I'm going to jump back up to the discussion clarification for clinical hours. Janelle, do we know what that is, or we just put that on?
I believe I do. There have been several questions with most of the programs were able to get back to their direct clinical sites this fall. I am aware that there are a couple of programs that have said they were not able to, and so have now spent a semester doing lab simulation, virtual simulation. And so I know we don't have a regulation in place at this point in time that limits the amount of simulation, but the question has come up about the regulation that does say there needs to be direct experience or direct clinical across the lifespan. So how does that affect, there was a question from a program, if they're not able to do any direct, and this could be especially difficult for a PN program, if they've had no direct experience to this point and they have 1 semester left, what does the requirement mean in terms of direct across the lifespan if they've already gone a semester without, and they're not able, what happens if they're not able to get into their clinical site in the spring, or maybe they're only able to do one of their courses? Because I think our current is that does there need to be direct in every clinical course? This is the question that came up. Or is it the fact that there has to be direct experience at some point in the program? We don't have a parameter on that at this point in time. So I think their programs are asking what's acceptable in terms of what's happening with COVID if they're not able to get in. Are they, where the board's direction on that in terms of the direct versus virtual for clinical time? Does that make sense?
Somewhat, yes. Dee, I'm going to lean on you a little bit about ASIN. What are they doing with the virtual direct clinical? What's their last statement out?
Yeah, so that's actually, I just grabbed the Nurse Practice Act because that's what I was going to look and see. And under 60-2104, it clearly says, number 3, direct clinical instruction as an integral part of the program. And then it goes on to number 4 and additional information. So yeah, I mean, I would interpret that as, I don't know, I'm going to go back to Carol Bragdon and her comment on the safety. I think the whole purpose of where we're at now is on patient safety. So how, I guess the question I would have back to that particular program is, how could they assure that they are graduating that safe practitioner at any level without any direct patient care? I would say the interpretation that we are getting from ACEN is that there does need to be direct patient care of some sort in each of the courses. Otherwise, perhaps having to delay, do an incomplete or something to that effect. But here again, things are very different now because of the pandemic, and that's why no doubt that these questions are coming before this committee. So that's my comment.
We interpreted that because it was, I think we're through the woods, but it was a very real possibility that we wouldn't have clinical sites in the spring, or that JCCC would not allow us on campus during the spring. And so the way I interpreted that for our program was that, and I notified the students of this even as early as interview process, that there is a possibility we may have to delay your graduation if we cannot get you direct clinical experience. And just made sure that they understood that. And then I just, again, sent an email out just a week or so ago to all of our students, again, reiterating that if for whatever reason we cannot get direct clinical experience, we will have to delay your graduation, because I personally cannot in good conscience graduate a group that has not had that direct clinical care. I just feel like there's a major safety factor there. But that's how we interpreted the regulation.
And that is the direction I've been giving programs in terms of the regulations say there has to be direct clinical experience across the lifespan. How they do that, if they have to delay clinical, and upfront theory, upload or front load theory, but I've kind of stuck with that. And I think I just wanted to, and does the direct versus virtual, I just want to make sure of the information that goes back out to the program, because they're all facing, inconsistencies, and most of them have maintained clinical fairly well. Now we're starting to see some of them drop out, but they've had some already. So it's going to be a matter of the couple of them that may not have gotten into any clinical are going to have to either figure out, it sounds like for the spring, how they're going to get that clinical managed. Because it's really not acceptable to have all virtual or lab clinical for any particular course, any one course. Is that what I'm hearing?
So a couple of things here. One of them is we are kind of being asked to ignore some of the regulation there, and we can't do that. That's not a job for us. That's our job to regulate that and make sure it's being followed. And so can we help or give some ideas of how they might look at different clinical sites? And I think we're all just going to have to wait and see. We all know there might be a possibility if we can't meet those recommendations and make sure they have some on hands, then we're looking at some kind of delay. The other thing, though, if we, you carte blanche say it's okay, do whatever, then some schools, I have noticed some comments are, oh, that's okay, and we don't have to work that hard at it. It's a lot of hard work to think out of the box and get some more things going. And I don't want to make that path more difficult, but I do think we don't have really any choice. Our hands are tied with the regulations. We have to comply with that. We have given some that, you need to do what you can do to make that, but knowing that you have to have some live clinical event in the program, as Dee just read out of the Nurse Practice Act. So does that help Janelle at all, or say, I don't know, when maybe?
I think it's really more of a confirmation of what the direction we've gone up till now. We've been pretty clear. I think the board was pretty clear even, 2 meetings ago when we had the questions that the regulations still state that the number of clinical hours in your program need to remain the same. We were encouraging them to think more about how they could use simulation as needed, because a lot of them were under, we don't have a cap on that, but we also don't have allowance for 100%. So because we have that piece in there, I think there was just some question about how much is too much. And I think that's still a matter of kind of going back to the objectives and the safety issues. There has to be some direct clinical experience for them to be able to assess whether they're safe in practice.
Any other discussion? Okay, I don't think we have to make a motion or any major decision there. So we're going to move on to the next thing, and that is the agenda for March of 2021. Yes, Carol?
I'm never quite sure, other than raising my hand here.
Yeah.
I just have a question, and this is just for the committee. It kind of seems like we have a lot of task force going on right now, which I think is a great idea, a good way to get the stuff done. But I'm just wondering if it would be helpful to the committee if there's actually a written report that comes back from the task force that could be placed in the packet, the committee packet. Reason I'm asking that is agency staff sometimes have to go back and try to do a little research on, why something was decided. And if there's no report in there, then what we have to do is sit and go through the whole recording. And I'm just wondering if the committee would find it helpful if there's a actual written report that comes from each of these task force. Maybe they can talk about, just some bullets about the discussion that they had, what documents maybe they referred to make their decision, and then what are their actual recommendations. And I think part of that should be at the very beginning, what is their charge, so that keeps them on track. I just wanted to throw that out there because I think there's going to be at least 2 or 3 reports coming back in March. So just a question for the committee. That's all.
I think that's a great idea. I already was out there a little bit. Adrian serves on the National Council State Boards of Nursing, and I asked about any kind of template that he might have access to for charter or charge that would let us know what the committee had, some of the work that they had done, minutes for the meetings and whatever. And he sent me a template, which is a great thing. And it does have the charter or the charge at the top. So we always reflect on that whenever we're getting ready to do that meeting, so we don't get off on bunny trails and spend time doing things and come back with the answers that we were requested of. That was requested of the group. So I think it's a great idea. I have that template. It might need a little bit of tweaking. I can do a little bit of work on it so it fits us just a little bit better. It's really hard to improve on National Council's work, right? They're pretty good at what they do. So formatting it to our needs, but I think it's a great idea. And it would be nice to have a trail of what was discussed, what the charter was. So 6 months down the road, we have another question. We can always go back to the decisions that were made there and some of the reasoning for that decision. Because I think the follow-up of that would be great, because we might be revisiting some of these topics again and carry on. Adrian, it's okay if we use that template in any way we want to, correct?
Yes, I mean, it was just from our committee. So yeah, some of that I added to the template. So some of it is mine in particular.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, Christina.
Is it okay for us to, when we meet, is it okay for us to record the Zoom meeting? So for creating that report and maybe something is not clear, we can go back and listen to that. Is there anything against that, or?
I don't think there's anything against that. Carol was talking about listening to the YouTube, or I listened to YouTube. I've listened to the Education Committee's YouTube from September. I think I've listened to it 3 times now because I wanted to make sure to clarify some of the things that were said there. That's pretty painful to sit there and listen to yourself for all those times. But yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with the recording. Maybe minutes of your meeting. Maybe somebody could take down minutes, and plus this template that we have, maybe that would be the minute capture. And then, as Carol was requesting, a formal report in some form that we could put in the packet so everybody would kind of know what was coming. Janelle?
Just a question about what the annual report task force did, because I do have documents. Some of those were a little bit late. They would have had to have been on site because we didn't get the final questions from NCSBN until last week. But do you want some kind of follow-up document so that the board has that in their record of our actual, what we used and what the task force did, and we know what the recommendation is because we have it. I'm just, because I can.
I'm a firm believer from when we make that decision now, we go from here forward instead of trying to back up and recreate. So let's just go from here on. But you have a good point too that I kind of heard here. And that is I have to work really hard when I'm in charge of a task force of getting started with that right away. That's why the 1st of January, I'll probably be contacting our group, because to put it off and wait till a week or so before the board meeting, that's pretty tough to do. And plus you need to have some time for some other movement if you need to. So I encourage anybody that's working on those to get some of that work started and going, maybe make some plans of some other meetings, even though you may cancel those, but put those in place now so we can get them on our calendars. That's tough. So I think that would be a great idea. Is everybody in agreement with that, or we have some other comments?
Thank Carol.
Carol?
See, this is Carol Moreland, and
Yeah.
I just want to make sure everybody is aware that if we're going to put this in the packet, that we do have a timeline in which that report has to be done and ready for the packet. You know, you all have made, not just your committee, but all the committees, the board has made it very clear to us they don't want on-site packets as a very, very last resort. So I think all of these committees probably have staff on them, but perhaps it would be helpful on that charter, on that whatever we're going to use, is the deadline that the final product has to be ready, because it is a ways out from when the actual board meeting is. But, you know, it's like 3 to 4 weeks ahead of time, and people don't realize that, but that's how long it takes us to get everything together on our end and get these packets ready and everything. So I just wanted to make everyone aware of that.
So the next board meeting is the end of March, right? 20, I've got it right here.
It's actually March 22nd, 23rd, and 24th.
So a month for that means it's the end of February. So when you put that in
Yeah.
perspective,
What we usually do in the agency is Jill presents a timeline to us so that we know when everything has to be done, and sends that out to all the staff that are involved with committees and everything like that. And so I can ask Jill to put that date together for us. It's usually about a month ahead of time, but I don't want to say positively, but I can certainly have her put that together because she's kind of got a thing that she follows.
okay, and the other thing about that is when we talked about a report, maybe we asked for a report at the March meeting, but if we haven't been able to come up with a recommendation yet, maybe it will be ongoing yet, and we would just have an update for the task force, because maybe the timeline's not going to let us get all that work done. I don't know. It depends on what that is. That's pretty tight. That's 8 weeks about. And everybody has another job, right? Yeah. So we'll just do the best we can do, but we will expect some kind of update or report, whether it's the formal recommendations of what the task force has decided or what the current considerations are, and when we might have that decision made or that recommendation. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, I'm going to get with Carol Moreland with this template that Adrian had, and we'll put some things together, and then I can send it out, or Carol or I can send it out to everyone so you have a look at the template of what we're talking about. And then we'll just pilot this and see how we're going. We may change some things in March, but I do think the recording or some kind of record, as Carol requested, might be a good suggestion for us to follow up with some of those decisions. That's a great idea. So agenda for March, I put report of the task force for, we have 2 things going on. One was about the task force to decide about, I don't know what we want to title that, clinical partnerships. Is that what we do?
Practice academic partnerships is what they are being referred to for the most part.
And the other one is for policies, school visits. So those are 2 that would have be reported for the agenda. Anything else on the March agenda?
Madam Chairman, this is Dee Bonenbless, and we also want to revisit the virtual reapprovals programs.
So we'll make another decision about how we'll handle those in March.
For fall.
Is that what you just said in terms of revisiting the on-site visit policy, whether they would continue to be virtual or? Is that what you're asking, Dee?
So, yeah, I think to clarify, it was how did, I mean, we already know we're going to do through March virtual. I think just a report as to how did it go and do we move forward? As Carol Bragdon said, we would revisit that every quarter.
Madam Chair, this is Chelsea Stevenson. I just want to clarify for the minutes. I do have 3 agenda items for March: the Clinical Partnerships Task Force update, and then the Site Visit Policies Task Force update, which I believe is what you had discussed with the several questions as far as the purpose of special focus site visits, et cetera. And then the topic of virtual versus in-person site visits for reapproval programs is something different from that task force update. Is that correct?
That's correct. Those are 3 different things. Mhm,
Okay,
have
thank
it
you.
right. Anything else we have on here that we want to put on that agenda? Okay, the last thing we have is adjournment, but before we do that, I just want to thank everybody for their time being on here today. I know, as Mandy said, she's probably working all the shifts nobody else can work. Everybody's burnt on both ends, and we're trying to look at a holiday we're supposed to be enjoying, but it's kind of tough with everything we got going. But I appreciate your effort and your willingness to be here and be prompt and be a part of the group. It's really hard to make these committees move forward and actually be productive if we have persons that are not able to attend and other priorities. I appreciate the effort for this education committee. Some of us might, if we had to do over again, might not volunteer for this committee because this is a lot of work. Some of the new members that I've talked to, the new board members, have said they just could not believe how much that goes on in some of these committees, especially our committee, that it's not about coming and signing the roster and being part of this group. It's hard work, and just remember, everybody in the state is appreciating our work to the details to make the best choice that we know with the backgrounds we have. So I appreciate the effort, and that's everybody, including Colton. Without him, I don't know, I would be not doing this, because any question I have, he's very gracious in answering those questions for us with IT stuff. So any other comments? Okay, then I need a motion, I guess, Chelsea, for adjournment.
Is there a committee member who would like to motion to adjourn the education committee meeting?
This is Karen. I'll make that motion.
This is Amy. I'll second.
Motion is second. I'm sure there's not much discussion. Everyone in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Opposed say no. Okay, thank you for your time. The meeting is adjourned.